On date in May 1945, in London, at 10 Downing Street, Winston Churchill stood alone with papers trembling slightly. The war in Europe had ended. The Atlantic was finally secured, yet victory carried a heavy personal weight. Churchill, older than the conflict itself, felt the silence after the guns, deeper than celebration. For nearly 6 years, German U-boats had hunted convoys, strangling Britain's lifeline, starving an island nation. Now the battle for the Atlantic was lost by Germany. But the cost lingered in memory and in Churchill's eyes. He recalled 3 September 1939, when Britain entered war, uncertain, exposed, and dangerously dependent on the sea. Every decision since then, every sleepless night, had circled one fear: losing the Atlantic routes. In the Admiralty war rooms, maps once marked with sinking ships now showed open lanes and fragile relief. Churchill knew this victory was not sudden. It was cumulative, earned mile by mile. He thought of 27 May 1941, after the Bismarck was sunk, a symbolic turn, but not an end. Radar escort carriers, codebreakers at Bletchley Park, and relentless sailors had slowly crushed the wolf packs. Standing there, Churchill understood that sea power, more than speeches, had kept Britain alive. Outside, crowds gathered with flags, while inside, history weighed heavier than applause. The Atlantic victory meant America's aid arrived. Canada's shipyards thrived, and Britain endured. Yet Churchill also sensed time turning against him. Politically, personally, inevitably. Within weeks, on 25 July 1945, voters would remove him from office, despite this hard-won triumph. For now, he allowed himself one thought: that Germany's defeat at sea had decided the war's fate. The ocean had been the battlefield of survival, and Britain had held, barely decisively. On 9 May 1945, Churchill addressed his inner circle inside Whitehall, speaking quietly rather than triumphantly. Germany's surrender on land felt final, yet the sea story demanded reflection and judgment. He spoke of the Atlantic not as a campaign, but as a test of national endurance. From 1940, June 1941, Britain stood isolated, with only ships and courage. Between survival and collapse, Churchill remembered reports crossing his desk at dawn. Tonnage lost, crews missing, names never recovered. Each convoy sunk meant less food, fewer weapons, and darker nights ahead. In Berlin, Admiral Dönitz had promised victory through submarines, seas believing Britain could be starved. Churchill understood that threat intimately. He had warned Parliament repeatedly, sometimes desperately. On 20 March 1941, losses peaked, and Britain's reserves shrank to weeks. He later admitted the only thing that truly frightened him was the U-boat peril. Yet change emerged quietly, through technology, patience, and ruthless adaptation. High-frequency direction finding, airborne radar, and longer-range escorts slowly shifted the balance. American entry after 7 December 1941 transformed the ocean into a shared front. Liberty ships crossed relentlessly, replacing losses faster than Germany could destroy them. By 24 May 1943, the tide turned decisively. U-boat casualties became unbearable. Churchill noted this moment carefully, knowing wars pivot on unseen thresholds. Germany's withdrawal from the Atlantic was not dramatic. It was an admission of failure. For Churchill, this defeat stripped Germany of strategic initiative long before Berlin fell. He knew Normandy, Italy, and the final advance all depended on open seas. Without Atlantic control, liberation would have remained impossible. Victory at sea had enabled victory everywhere else. Still, Churchill spoke without celebration, honoring sailors who never returned. The Atlantic, calm now, concealed countless graves beneath its surface. History would remember generals, but Churchill remembered convoys. On 10 May 1945, Churchill sat with naval commanders in a modest room, heavy with unspoken memories. Maps were rolled away now, but the Atlantic still dominated every conversation. He asked not about glory, but about lessons, quietly, deliberately. The sea war, he reminded them, had been decided long before Germany's final surrender. He traced it back to 1942, January 1943, when U-boats prowled the American coast, unchecked, ruthless. Tankers burned within sight of shore, and arrogance briefly favored Germany. Churchill criticized Allied complacency, knowing early failures had cost thousands of lives. Yet he also recognized adaptability as the true weapon of survival. Convoy systems tightened, air coverage expanded, and intelligence sharpened its edge. By 18th April 1943, losses began to fall, subtly at first, then decisively. Churchill emphasized how secrecy shaped victory, especially the breaking of Enigma codes. He never named Bletchley Park publicly, but privately, he called it decisive. Each decrypted signal meant an avoided ambush, a saved crew, a living ship. In Germany, Dönitz faced impossible arithmetic, more losses, fewer trained crews. On 23 May 1943, mass U-boat withdrawals signaled strategic collapse. Churchill understood this as Germany's silent defeat, invisible to civilians, fatal to strategy. Without Atlantic dominance, Hitler's war machines starved slowly. Factories lacked oil, armies lacked supplies, allies lost confidence. Churchill framed the Atlantic as a war of production, not just combat. Britain and America outbuilt, outlearned, and outlasted their enemy. He warned, however, that future wars would remember these seas. Technology had changed warfare forever. Oceans were no longer barriers. The Atlantic, once Britain's shield, had become a global highway. Churchill sensed the post-war world forming, even as ruins still smoked. Victory carried responsibility, and history would demand restraint. The sea, calm again, watched silently. On 11th May 1945, Churchill walked through Admiralty corridors, slower now, absorbing the end of a long vigil. Walls once crowded with officers now echoed faintly, as urgency gave way to reflection. He paused before a naval chart faded by years of pins and red markings. Each mark represented a crisis, a convoy threatened, a decision made under pressure. Churchill remembered 1940, October 1940, when Britain stood alone and invasion seemed possible. The Atlantic then was a narrow bridge between hope and extinction. German submarines multiplied, while Britain's escorts were stretched thin. Churchill authorized risks others feared, sending ships despite losses, trusting momentum. He believed hesitation would kill faster than action. By 1941, August 1941, cooperation with Roosevelt deepened. Even before America entered the war, the Atlantic Charter, signed at sea, symbolized shared destiny. Churchill saw oceans not as borders, but as bonds between allies. When America formally joined after 7th December 1941, the Atlantic transformed overnight. Shipyards thundered, schedules accelerated, and numbers became weapons. Churchill admired this industrial response, knowing wars are won by factories as much as fleets. He often said the U-boat threat was mathematical, not heroic. By 1942, November 1942, escort carriers began closing air gaps, sealing Germany's advantage. The hunter became the hunted slowly, relentlessly. Churchill followed monthly loss charts, watching lines cross, then reverse. He felt vindication but never relief. Each improvement arrived too late for thousands already lost. He thought of sailors from Liverpool, Halifax and New York, swallowed without witness. Victory, he believed, demanded memory, not forgetfulness. As political tides shifted at home, Churchill sensed his own ending approaching. Still, the Atlantic outcome stood beyond politics. Germany had lost the war the moment the seas were secured. The rest was inevitability unfolding. On 12 May 1945, Churchill dictated notes late at night, his voice steady, his expression distant. Victory speeches had been delivered, yet unfinished thoughts crowded his mind. He wanted history to understand the Atlantic as a war of patience, not drama. The enemy had been invisible, often unheard, striking from darkness. Churchill recalled 1943, made in 1943, the month that finally broke German resolve at sea. In those weeks, U-boat losses mounted faster than replacements. Crews vanished, morale collapsed. He described it as a strangulation reversed, Britain breathing again. Yet he refused triumphal language, knowing the ocean punished arrogance. Every technological gain, sonar, radar, escort carriers, came through brutal trial. Mistakes were paid for in lives, not reputation. Churchill emphasized cooperation. British science, American industry, Canadian persistence. The Atlantic victory was collective. No single nation could claim it alone. He thought of 1944, June 1944, when Normandy landings depended entirely on secure seas. Without Atlantic control, D-Day would have been impossible. That realization hardened his belief. The sea war had decided everything. Germany's armies fought on land, but without supply, courage alone failed. Churchill wrote that Hitler lost the moment he lost the ocean. He also noted irony. Submarines nearly saved Germany, then destroyed it. Resources poured into U-boats, draining other fronts. By 1944, September 1944, German naval power was irrelevant. Still, the ocean kept its dead. Churchill insisted future generations remember merchant sailors as warriors. They had no medals, no parades, only duty. As dawn approached, Churchill ended his notes quietly. He sensed his own chapter closing. The Atlantic chapter, however, would define the century. On 13th May 1945, Churchill stood before a small gathering. Not a crowd, but men who had shared secrets. Naval officers, intelligence chiefs, and ministers listened as he spoke without rhetoric. He reminded them that victory often appears obvious only after danger has passed. The Atlantic, he said, nearly broke Britain in ways few understood. Churchill returned to 1940, July 1940, when convoys sailed with inadequate escort. Decisions then were made with incomplete knowledge and terrible consequences. He admitted privately, errors haunted him more than praise ever could. Still, learning came faster than defeat. New tactics emerged, hunter-killer groups, aggressive pursuit, constant pressure. The Allies learned not to react, but to dominate. Churchill highlighted 1942, February 1942, when coordination failures cost heavily. From that pain, unified command structures were forged. The Atlantic War demanded unity, no room for rivalry or delay. By 1943, June 1943, Allied doctrine matured, efficient, relentless. Germany, by contrast, adapted too slowly. Dönitz clung to submarines even as losses became catastrophic. Churchill framed this as a lesson in leadership. Stubbornness, when detached from reality, becomes self-destruction. He contrasted this with Allied flexibility, changing methods mid-war. Factories shifted designs, crews retrained, tactics rewritten. Churchill believed adaptability saved civilization. He warned that future conflicts would test this again. Technology would accelerate, mistakes would multiply. The Atlantic showed how fast wars evolve. As the meeting ended, Churchill paused. He knew these lessons would soon leave his hands. History would judge whether they were remembered. On Bletchley, May 1945, Churchill watched the Thames flow steadily, unchanged by war or victory. From a window near Parliament, he reflected on endurance, both nationally and personal. The Atlantic campaign, he believed, mirrored Britain's character. Stubborn, adaptive, quietly resilient. He thought back to 1917, April 1917, when Germany's submarines first shocked the world. History, he knew, had returned with greater force. This time, however, Britain had not faced it alone. Churchill considered the human chain stretching across the ocean. Dock workers, engineers, sailors. Every link mattered, every failure echoed outward. En 1941, November 1941, convoys increased despite rising losses. Churchill defended this choice fiercely. Movement was survival. To stop sailing was to surrender without invasion. The Atlantic demanded motion, not safety. He reflected on morale, fragile yet decisive. News of sunk ships could break spirits faster than bombs. Churchill worked relentlessly to control language, framing losses without despair. Words, he understood, could steady a nation. By 1943, August 1943, confidence quietly returned. Ships arrived more often than they vanished. Harbors filled, warehouses swelled, factories ran without pause. Germany's failure at sea became irreversible. Churchill believed this was when victory truly entered reach. Yet he refused complacency. He warned ministers that wars are lost after victory, not before it. Neglect, division, and exhaustion follow success. The Atlantic had taught discipline. As clouds passed over London, Churchill felt time closing in. His leadership chapter was nearing its end. But the sea and its lesson would remain. On the 15th May 1945, Churchill reviewed final naval summaries. Their numbers precise, their meaning immense. The documents showed losses reduced to margins, shipping flowing freely once more. For Churchill, statistics now carried ghosts. Each figure represented a crew, a family, a life interrupted. He remembered June 1942, when Caribbean routes burned nightly, oil slicks flaming on water. Those scenes had hardened his resolve. The Atlantic War demanded moral stamina as much as strategy. Churchill believed leaders must absorb suffering without flinching. He spoke of this privately, never publicly. Victory, he argued, does not erase responsibility. By March 1944, Allied maritime supremacy was absolute. Germany could harass, but not influence events. Churchill viewed this dominance as fragile, not permanent. Power at sea, once lost, is painfully difficult to regain. He urged post-war planners to remember this lesson. Britain's survival, historically, had rested on naval awareness. The Atlantic confirmed this truth brutally. Churchill also acknowledged American ascendancy. The ocean had become a shared space, no longer British alone. He accepted this shift without resentment. Partnership, he believed, had saved Europe. As election pressures mounted at home, Churchill felt divided. He carried victory in war, but uncertainty in peace. The Atlantic triumph would not protect him politically. Still, he refused regret. He had chosen survival over popularity. As evening fell, Churchill closed the folders. The sea war was finished. The consequences were just beginning. On 16th May 1945, Churchill prepared remarks he might never deliver. The election loomed, the mood shifting, victory already receding into routine. He understood the cruelty of democracy, swift judgment after long service. Yet his thoughts returned again to the Atlantic. That struggle, he believed, would outlast politics. He reflected on September 1940, when Britain's shipping losses threatened collapse. In those days, survival felt improbable. Churchill had chosen defiance over compromise, risking everything on endurance. He wondered privately whether any other choice had existed. The Atlantic answered that question. Control of the sea had bought time, and time had saved Britain. He thought of December 1942, when American shipbuilding surged beyond expectation. Numbers overwhelmed fear. Germany's strategy, brilliant in conception, failed in execution. Submarines could not defeat an industrial coalition. Churchill framed this as the triumph of systems over individuals. No single hero won the Atlantic. It was won by coordination, production, and learning. He feared future generations would romanticize war, forgetting this reality. The Atlantic was not glorious. It was cold, repetitive, merciless. Victory there lacked spectacle, but decided fate. Churchill believed this made it more important, not less. As night fell over London, he set his notes aside. History would choose what to remember. He had done his part to shape it. The sea, indifferent as ever, remained silent. Only one chapter remained. On 17th May 1945, Churchill faced the quiet aftermath, the kind history rarely dramatizes. There were no alarms, no urgent cables, only reflection. Germany was defeated, the Atlantic secure, and the world moving forward without pause. Churchill thought of 25 July 1945, already approaching the day voters would decide his fate. He accepted this calmly, shaped by years of impermanence. Power, like command at sea, is temporary. What endured were consequences. The Atlantic victory had ensured Britain lived long enough to choose peace. He believed that alone justified every hard decision. Churchill recalled standing at the beginning, On 3 September 1939, uncertain, resolute, human, the journey from fear to survival had been paid in steel, oil, and blood. He never forgot the merchant sailors, unarmed, uncelebrated, indispensable. Their war had no front lines, only horizons. Churchill believed history must remember them alongside generals. As he finalized his thoughts, he spoke words never recorded officially. Germany, he believed, lost the war the moment it lost the sea. The Atlantic had denied Hitler time, space, and supply. Land battles followed inevitably. This truth, quiet and absolute, defined the conflict. Churchill felt no bitterness leaving office. He had fought for existence, not applause. The sea had answered that fight. Long after speeches fade, oceans remember. The Atlantic, once a battlefield, returned to silence. Its lesson remained. Survival belongs to those who adapt. Churchill stepped back from history's center. The war at sea, however, would echo through the century.